What we're looking to do with the curriculum is take our students from their experience, mainly at the tactical and operational level, and helping elevate them to the strategic level of the profession. We say the profession, there's a lot of expertise that they need to master, and particular areas that they need to be able to practice it. And the most obvious one is war, but there's a lot that we do with coercive force, the use of the military, and other national security instruments of power and national security capabilities to accomplish what the American public needs accomplished, what society needs done. That's what a profession does, is provide key elements of society's needs. So when we look at the core curriculum, we've structured it around big topics, and really going back to the founding, we tend to summarize as three great problems of national defense, military science, and responsible command. And there's a lot of elements to each of those, as you might imagine. And our curriculum tends to branch from those three elements. So theory of war and strategy, national security policy and strategy, strategic leadership, theater strategy and campaigning, defense management, and regional studies are sort of the big core courses. And what we found is that we looked at the themes of those core courses, trying to find a case to sort of make them real. We found that the Gulf War from 1990-91 does an excellent job of that. And some of the reasons for that are it's close enough to the present day that it's sort of after some of the major reform efforts, particularly what we call the Goldwater-Nichols Defense Reform Act of 1986. So the era of jointness as we understand it now is a major component, first being played out in a major war in the Gulf War. This is only 5 years after the act was passed. It's also a really fascinating time in world history. So if you think of big movements going on in history, it's what we realize now when we look back, the very end of the Cold War. The Berlin Wall had come down in November 1989. The Soviet Union still exists, but had just withdrawn from Afghanistan, also in 1989. We see the Warsaw Pact sort of coming apart, and so the world order, the bipolar world order as we understood it for many years, many decades, is changing. And when Saddam Hussein invades Iraq in August 1990, it sort of falls right in that point where we're sort of sorting out what this new world order may or may not be. And so putting that regional conflict in the context of a broader global set of circumstances, and then going to the specific, so sort of what international relations are and how they're being shaped and moving at the time. And this whole idea of transformations in warfare. Some talked about a revolution in military affairs, and most of that language comes after the Gulf War, looking at what precision-guided munitions and some of these very high-tech equipment. Things developed in the 70s and 80s in the United States, first sort of used in combat in Desert Storm. And looking back at, so Desert Storm isn't just a product of overnight, it's the product of decades of evolution of the US military. A lot of technology, a lot of techniques that are first used there. And so it's also a fascinating time to see some of the things that still have a lot of echoes in the present day. And of course, regionally, we thought of it in some regard as a kind of a, the Gulf War of 1990-91, but in fact, we're still there today. And there's a lot of second and third order effects that stem directly from that conflict. So although it's sort of presented as a historical case study looking at the themes, there's a lot of things that that sort of play into how we look at the world today. And so, like I said, each of those core courses, where did we get that equipment from? Defense management, the choices made, the defense budget and efforts there, which tend to be a little bit inside baseball sometimes. They're a prominent part of the background of this war, that larger context of the international environment. Jointness with the new approach, a combatant command that's less than 10 years old, Central Command. That General Schwarzkopf is one of the first to go to war in this new construct. And so you've got enough at the sort of fascinating elements in the context of this particular conflict. And then there's the part that I haven't really focused on that much, is the strategic leadership aspect. I mean, General Schwarzkopf is a graduate of the Army War College, and now back in I think he graduated in the 70s, and so when he shows up, 1990-91 in Desert Storm, he's bringing. And we, as some of the readings, use his readings in his memoirs about his time at Carlisle Barracks in the War College, and sort of lay those against where he ended up. And so to some of those experiences, partly telling our students, not quite, pretty explicitly, hey, this could be you. You're a colonel now, and then a decade or so later, you may be a combatant commander. And the experience here is meant to help you cope with that sort of environment. Same thing with General Powell, a National War College graduate, who also is, and we have things from his memoirs about when he was at the National War College and some of his experiences to get where he is as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And President Bush and Secretary of State Baker and other key players, strategic leaders, making these very difficult choices. I mean, we kind of know how it turned out. These are the people who are shaping it. And so how they thought through these things and made strategic judgments, exercised discretionary judgment in some of the most profound and influential sorts of circumstances, life and death in the balance, the fate of nations, those sorts of things. So really, it's just a wonderful vehicle. So why the Gulf War? Interesting case just historically, but as a vehicle for our curriculum, we found that it was an excellent way to sort of draw the students into the War College, introduce them to the major themes of the curriculum. What right looks like at the strategic level, or how to think about war at the strategic level and other elements of national security. In that regard, the Gulf War case really is very, very helpful. We're dealing with national security professionals who've been selected based on incredible performance up to this time. They've got great potential going forward, but most of them haven't had the sort of exposure at the senior level. So we're helping them through a transition. And part of what the Gulf War case is meant to do is to illustrate that transition. Like I said, to be most explicit about the individualized part, General Powell and General Schwarzkopf as sort of models, U.S. Army colonels, War College graduates at some point in their career who are then placed in these incredibly demanding circumstances. What armed them as leaders, what armed them in terms of the body of expert knowledge that they had to bring to bear on these profound problems, and what are the elements of those problems.